In our headlines on this Thursday, January 23rd, here in South Korea, President Yoon makes a second appearance at the Constitutional Court on this Thursday for his impeachment trial, during which former Defense Minister Kim Yong-hyun took the witness stand. Meanwhile, the South Korean economy grows 2% in 2024 as its expansion in the fourth quarter notes a 0.1% growth amid the political unrest triggered by the brief imposition of martial law on December 3rd. Over in Washington, D.C., new U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio hosts his counterparts of the Quad framework for talks which ends with a joint statement that visibly omits any mention of North Korea and its nuclear weapons ambitions. We started the Constitutional Court, where the fourth hearing into the impeachment case against President Yoon kicked off this afternoon, again in his presence. For more on this, Arirang's Oh Soo-young joins us live from the court. Soo-young, so what are the latest events there?
Good afternoon, Sunny. Yes, President Yoon, he appeared in front of court justices for the second time to attend his fourth impeachment trial hearing, where former Defense Minister Kim Yong-hyun attended. He was called in as the first of 8 witnesses to the trial. Now, Kim Yong-hyun, he is one of the key figures implicated in the planning and execution of the martial law on December 3rd, and now considered President Yoon's right-hand man. Kim has initially said that he would take responsibility for the chaos that ensued, and it seemed that his loyalty to the president remains intact, as he initially refused to answer questions by the National Assembly's impeachment panel, saying that his words were likely to be distorted. Now, he did change his mind after the short break, and as the session proceeded, the focus of the questions was on the legality of the martial law decree, with Kim insisting that Yoon had held a proper cabinet meeting beforehand, saying that a copy of the martial law declaration was distributed to cabinet members and that somebody had kept the minutes. Also, when asked if he had written the controversial note that the finance minister Choi Sang-mok received, instructing him to draft a budget for an emergency legislative body, Kim said that he had, and had handed it to an administrative staff member. Now, this came after President Yoon initially said he could not remember whether he or the defense minister had written the note, before recently denying that he had. There was also much attention on the martial law proclamation, which included a ban on political activities, one of the Assembly's grounds for impeaching Yoon. Now, the former defense minister said he had personally typed up the proclamation on his personal laptop, but couldn't seem to recall which software he'd been using when asked by the Assembly. Furthermore, on whether there was an order for military troops to storm the National Assembly on December 3rd and drag out Assembly members, Kim said the order had meant troop members inside the Assembly to avoid potential clashes. Now, with his testimony on Thursday, Kim more or less seems to be establishing the stance that the martial law was declared to uphold the constitutional order. This was an argument that the president team has been making, saying that the opposition-led parliament had been trying to impeach incumbent officials, thwart effective governance and cut down budgets vital to public safety and livelihoods. The National Assembly side, meanwhile, has continued to argue that Yoon's martial law declaration and the related decrees were unconstitutional and violated procedures, citing how cabinet members said they didn't agree with the martial law nor documented their approval.
Right, and going forward, Soo-young, the president will now be attending, I hear, all of the remaining 4 sessions.
That's right. The president's lawyers have said that, if possible, Yoon will be attending all future sessions, which have been scheduled until February 13th. And so far, his team has unsuccessfully filed appeals against his arrest. And as the president's his former colleagues, the major figures implicated in the suspected insurrection, have also been arrested, he is looking quite cornered when it comes to the criminal investigations against him. So by attending future hearings, President Yoon could emphasize his own narrative, and he might even directly ask questions to witnesses if necessary, as he did today. Also, he may be more determined to appear at the Constitutional Court as a means of further rallying his supporters, emboldened by the latest polls, which show growing numbers back the ruling party and his non-impeachment. On Thursday, the police deployed 54 riot police units, which consist of 3,500 officers around the court to prepare for potential incidents. Approximately 160 police buses were stationed, forming physical walls around the Constitutional Court. About 200 people were gathered nearby, waving Korean and American flags and chanting for the president's release and for the court to drop the impeachment case. On the opposite side of the street, though, people were calling for his impeachment and for the president to be punished. The police formed tight lines to prevent possible clashes occurring between the opposing groups.
Right, I see. All right, Seung, thank you for the latest on the impeachment trial at the Constitutional Court. Meanwhile, staying with the president's political fate, the Corruption Investigation Office for high-ranking officials is transferring its investigation of the president to the Seoul Central District Prosecutor's Office. For more on this, I have our Kim Jung-shil standing by live at the prosecutor's office here in the capital city. Jung-shil, welcome. Let's begin with this latest development.
Yes, Sunny, the atmosphere here at the Seoul Central District Prosecutor's Office is rather quiet this afternoon, with the investigation into President Yoon officially transferred here as of today. The CIO formally requested the prosecution take over the case as of this morning. That took place 50 days after the declaration of martial law. Take a listen to a comment by a CIO official from this morning.
The CIO has today decided to request the prosecution of the suspect in accordance with Article 26, Section 1 of the CIO Act, and has referred the case to the Seoul Central District Prosecutor's Office.
The CIO deputy chief added that President Yoon's refusal to cooperate has stalled the investigation. During the first 10-hour questioning session on the day of his arrest, he remained silent and later declined further questioning, citing health and safety concerns. The CIO also faced repeated interference from the Presidential Security Service in attempts to seize key evidence, including the president's secret phone. Deputy Chief Lee explained that while the CIO has investigative authority, it lacks the power to press charges on the president, so the case was handed over earlier than planned, initially set for next Tuesday. Now, the investigation will now be handled by prosecutors in this office behind me.
Right. Jung-shil, what are the prospects regarding the president's cooperation with the investigation now that it has been handed over to the prosecutors?
Well, Sunny, it still remains uncertain, as there is a possibility that President Yoon will argue that the prosecution, too, does not have authority to pursue charges of insurrection, which under South Korean law is handled by the police. However, as no sitting president has ever been investigated by the police, and former presidents have been investigated by prosecutors because they have the authority to investigate related crimes such as abuse of power. Now, take a listen to a legal expert on this.
Technically, it's true that the power to investigate crimes of insurrection has been given to the police and the prosecution office, but the prosecution office retains the power to investigate any crimes that are related to crimes that they are investigating. The president is charged not only with, or potentially will be charged not only with the crime of insurrection, but also with abuse of office and several other crimes that are still within the power of the prosecution office to investigate.
With both arrest and detention warrants issued by the court, legal experts argue that there is significant, substantial evidence that proves President Yoon's involvement in this. That's all I have for this hour. Back to you, Sunny.
All right, Jung-shil, thank you for that coverage. That was our Kim Jung-shil reporting live from the prosecutor's office here in capital Seoul. Now, the Constitutional Court on Thursday ruled against an impeachment motion targeting Lee Jin-suk, the head of the nation's broadcast watchdog. Now, Lee, who had been suspended from duty as the chair of the Korean Communications Commission, returned to work after 174 days. Last year, the main opposition Democratic Party unilaterally passed an impeachment motion against her, claiming she had made important decisions with just one other member of the commission, as the 3 remaining commission seats were vacant. Out of the 8 justices at the Constitutional Court, 4 ruled in her favor, asserting that the number of incumbent members of the commission at the time does not render their decisions illegal. An impeachment requires 6 justices to support the case. Also, on the local political front, the head of the main opposition Democratic Party has placed national priority on recovery and growth. Speaking at a press conference earlier on this Thursday, Lee Jae-myung called for a pragmatic approach to tackling challenges, one that sets aside partisan politics. He also called for the creation of new growth engines by investing in AI robots. Separately, he condemned acting President Choi Sang-mok for failing to approve a special probe bill aimed at President Yoon. In other news, the South Korean economy marked a 2% annual growth last year, slightly below earlier projections. Our correspondent Lee Soo-jin reports.
South Korea's economy only showed modest growth in 2024. That's according to data from the Bank of Korea released on Thursday, which shows that the country's gross domestic product, a key indicator of economic growth, grew 2% on year in 2024. This was lower than both the central bank's November forecast of 2.2% and the government's forecast of 2.1%.
After our November forecast, political uncertainty in the country grew, and economic sentiment weakened, which then impacted private consumption. Construction investment also remained sluggish as orders remained weak.
In 2024, private consumption rose 1.1%, which was lower than the 1.8% increase of the year before, while construction investment entered into negative territory. But as exports saw a sharp rise, jumping to 6.9% from 3.9% in 2023, leading economic growth, while modest, to be higher than that of last year's 1.4% on solid exports, a rise after 3 straight years of decline. As for the fourth quarter, economic growth expanded only 0.1% on quarter and was also lower than the central bank's forecast. The central bank mainly attributed this to small growth in private and public spending, as well as negative growth in construction investment. This follows an on-quarter increase of 1.3% in the first quarter, negative growth of 0.2% in the second, and 0.1% in the third quarter. With last year's economic growth hovering below forecasts, there are rising concerns about South Korea's economic growth this year, fueled by factors such as U.S. President Donald Trump's tariffs.
Korean economy has been dependent upon the international trade and export to the United States. Multinational enterprise has promised to build a factory in the United States to avoid a tariff. But as long as they make use of some parts produced in China or other countries, they are still subject to the tariff.
The Bank of Korea Monday lowered this year's GDP growth forecast to as low as 1.6% and the government to 1.8% in its 2025 economic policy plans released early this month. Lee Soo-jin, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, on the corporate front, SK hynix staged a stellar performance last year on the back of strong demand for AI memory. Our Arirang has more.
SK hynix, the world's second-largest memory chip maker, has announced that it recorded its highest-ever revenue and operating profit in 2024, driven by the strong demand for high-bandwidth memory. The company said Thursday that its revenue surpassed 66 trillion Korean won, or around $46 billion, marking a 102% increase compared to the previous year. Operating profit turned positive, soaring to just over $16 billion. Last year's fourth quarter also saw a record-high operating profit of over $6 billion. SK hynix reported record revenue surpassing 2022 by over $14 billion, and its operating profit exceeded the 2018 peak. One expert says the first half of this year is expected to be very promising, noting Trump's AI initiative.
Given the new launch of Trump government, semiconductor industry in general and HBM in particular, there are a lot of good materials to push SK hynix stock price at the moment. So it is quite positive in the short term based.
Meanwhile, LG Electronics achieved record high revenue in 2024, reaching approximately $61 billion, a 6.6% increase compared to the previous year. This growth was driven by strong performance in its core home appliance business and expanding automotive electronics sector, which has seen 9 years of consecutive growth. This marks the company's highest revenue in 2 years. However, both annual and quarterly operating profit declined, attributed to slower recovery in global consumer electronics demand and rising logistics costs. The company experienced an earnings shock in Q4, with operating profit halving and falling more than 56% year-on-year to over $93 million. On the same day, Hyundai Motor also released last year's revenue data, reporting over 175 trillion Korean won, or more than $121 billion, which is up 7.7% on year, but operating profit declined 5.9% to around $9.7. Hyundai Motor's revenue for the fourth quarter of 2024 rose nearly 12% compared to the same period last year, driven by strong sales of high-value models, including hybrid and Genesis vehicles, which boosted the average selling price. However, Q4 operating profit fell 17% to almost $2 billion, impacted by higher incentives, external uncertainties, and a sharp rise in exchange rates. A Hyundai official stated that despite these challenges, the company continues to grow, supported by strong North American sales and increasing hybrid model sales. 이은희, Arirang News.
Samsung's Galaxy S25 series are out, and they're pledging to change the way individuals interact with their smartphones, thanks, of course, to AI. Our business correspondent Moon Hae-ryun explains.
Imagine a phone that knows what you need before you do. That's what Samsung's latest smartphones promise to make a reality. At its Unpacked conference on Wednesday in San Jose, California, Samsung Electronics announced its latest flagship Galaxy smartphones, the Galaxy S25 series. The Galaxy S25, S25 Plus and S25 Ultra are all equipped with new AI tools unseen in their predecessors, unveiled as the firm's first AI smartphones a year ago. The new models will hit the shelves on February 7th in the same price range as the S24. They use Google's Gemini AI model alongside Samsung's in-house AI voice assistant Bixby and Qualcomm's Snapdragon 8 Elite chips for on-device processing, meaning that you don't have to be connected to the internet to be able to use AI functions. And these AI functions provide a key element in the S25 user experience: personalization.
With the S25, users can enjoy a seamless experience where the AI, agent and personalized AI features make life easier. Just say what you need, and the phone will recommend and handle it for you.
For example, Now Brief and Now Bar are new services that provide a morning feed catering to your personal preferences based on user data, as well as giving you updates throughout the day, such as giving you directions to your next meeting or giving you a breakdown of the latest sports games you've missed based on what teams you follow. And this is another reason why on-device processing is so crucial, because personal data used to tailor these functions will only be stored and processed on the phone. With many using mobile phones to search the web, Gemini's search tool enables users to look up information from their own images and even videos.
The new S25 also makes everyday interactions easier by simply being able to ask your phone to do things. Schedule the launch of the new S25 in my calendar. Schedule it for February 7th.
While the new AI features are the main focal point of the new phones, the hardware also boasts some upgrades. The new Ultra line has a 50-megapixel sensor on its ultra-wide rear camera in contrast to the S24's 12 megapixels for better quality images and videos, and also features a new, hardier screen. The series overall has rounded corners with a reduced bezel for bigger display, and there's an even thinner model to come called the Galaxy S25 Edge. This model was briefly previewed at the end of the Unpacked event, setting up competition in the skinny smartphone market, with Apple's ultra-thin model expected to come later this year. Moon Hae-ryun, Arirang News.
And over in Washington earlier this week, newly appointed U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio hosted his counterparts of the Quad framework for talks which ended with a joint statement that visibly omitted any mention of North Korea and its nuclear weapons ambitions. Our Lee Jin-suk has details.
The top diplomats of the United States, Australia, India, and Japan met in Washington for their first Quad foreign ministers meeting since the launch of the Donald Trump administration earlier this week. This meant that U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who was the first to be confirmed in Trump's new cabinet, was taking part in the meeting for the first time. However, the joint statement issued by the foreign ministers of the Quad nations saw the removal of any reference to the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. Instead, the top diplomats vowed to strengthen a free and open Indo-Pacific while opposing any unilateral actions that seek to change the status quo by force or coercion. It also did not mention China or North Korea by name. The latest joint statement is in stark contrast to the previous years, where the foreign ministers reaffirmed their commitment to the complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. The difference in the joint statement also comes as Trump and his defense chief nominee, Peter Hegseth, used the term nuclear power to describe North Korea. And according to a prominent U.S. expert and former officer at the U.S. National Intelligence Council, Sidney Saylor, the new U.S. administration believes Pyongyang's nuclear threat has evolved over the last 4 years, given the use of a term that was largely avoided by U.S. officials in the past. Saylor says the Trump administration faced the reality that the regime continues to grow its arsenal qualitatively and quantitatively, and the threat is greater than 4 years ago. He added that the remarks are a realistic view of the threat. While the term nuclear power is different from nuclear weapons state, a term used to describe countries like the U.S., Russia, and the U.K., it raises concerns for South Korea, which seeks close policy coordination with Washington to achieve denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. Lee Jin-suk, Arirang News.
And Foreign Minister Cho held talks on the phone with U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio earlier this morning, during which the two top diplomats agreed to maintain close coordination in response to North Korea's nuclear weapons ambitions. According to the Foreign Ministry here, Minister Cho also shared hopes for greater advancements in the bilateral alliance under the new U.S. administration. Rubio, for his part, reportedly invited his Korean counterpart to the U.S. for more talks on cooperation. Both officials also highlighted the importance of the trilateral security partnership, including Japan.
The ultrafine dust has been a problem for 4 days. We passed the worst of the smoke yesterday, but the air quality in most parts of the country is still at a bad level. As a result, ultrafine dust advisories are still in place. However, from this afternoon, the air has been starting to clear. Ultrafine dust levels will gradually ease off tomorrow, except for some areas in central and western parts of the country. Meanwhile, there's rain or snow forecast for the East Coast areas between tomorrow night and Saturday to relieve the dryness. Until then, the atmosphere will stay very dry with dry weather advisories. Tomorrow's Seoul will start off at -2 degrees Celsius, Daejeon at -4 degrees. Highs will move up to 9 degrees in Seoul, Gwangju and Busan 13 degrees. The weather will be mostly sunny and warm in inland areas this weekend. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
Those are the headlines at this hour here in South Korea. We return with our panel session in a few minutes, so do stay with us.